Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and these are the 10 best legendary cards to craft. Now, before I get into the list, I do want to explain some conditions for this list. First off, this is focused primarily on standard format shortly after the Mean Streets of Gadgetzan was released, so keep that in mind if you're watching this video in the future. Another couple things to note is that this list focuses on cards that I think are going to give you the most long-term value. So what that means is that I biased this list a little bit towards cards in the classic set that will presumably stay in standard format forever, as opposed to cards which will be rotating out faster. So I want you to have a bigger classic collection because those cards are going to fit into more decks for a longer time, giving you a greater return on investment for your arcane dust. I also placed a focus on neutral cards as opposed to class cards. That's not to say there won't be class cards on the list. There will. It's just that the cards at the top of the list are more likely to be neutral cards because they too will fit into a wider array of decks. All that said, let's go ahead and jump into the list. Starting off with number 10, it is the Dragon Ysera. This is really ultimately just the perfect control style late game value card. There are so many matchups where if you're in a control matchup, control versus control, you can drop Ysera on the board. They don't necessarily have an answer. She just continues to generate a card after a card after a card, and that is a win condition. That wins you the game because you get so much extra resources and just so much raw value out of Ysera. Even if they remove her, she does give you some instant value back with the Dream card right after you play her. So her stats, her Dragon affiliation, her effect all come together to build a really, really strong card that has been a part of the control meta for a long time. Moving on to the number 9 spot, it's the Rogue Minion Edwin Van Cleef. This guy has been important to Hearthstone essentially as long as Miracle Rogue has been important to Hearthstone, and it's been a big deck for many, many years. And that style of play where you draw a lot of cards on a Gadgetzan Auctioneer, you have crazy burst damage, is supplemented really nicely by Edwin Van Cleef because he's the kind of card that can get you a really big body very efficiently. And in a high-tempo deck like that, they can do crazy tempo plays with things like preparation and cheap free backstabs and a lot of cheap spells. You can turn this guy into an 8-8, a 10-10, a 12-12. Crazy kinds of stats that makes him very difficult for your opponents to remove and just gives you another threat and another win condition, which has been important for Rogue. So as long as Rogue has been in the meta, Edwin Van Cleef has been a part of it. And that style of play doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon because all of the cards necessary to make Miracle Rogue a successful deck are a part of the classic set and seem like they could fit into standard format basically forever. So Edwin Van Cleef seems like a safe bet to craft if you're ever planning to play Rogue. Next up is the number 8 spot, and it's the first card on the list that isn't a part of the classic set. This is Nezhat the Corruptor from the Whispers of the Old Gods expansion. And even though this guy will eventually rotate out of standard format, I still think he's worth crafting just because it's the kind of card that can become the foundation or the centerpiece of a deck. In other words, Nezhat decks are a thing. They haven't necessarily always been the most dominant in the meta, but this is the kind of card that if you craft it, can give your collection so much weight and so much power that you can start to build decks around it and grow as a Hearthstone player. Plus, if you like control style as an archetype, this card just gives you something to always fall back on to build that kind of deck. So Nezhat has shown up across a variety of classes. He's fit into some competitively viable decks and seems like the kind of card that is just going to stay good as long as he's in standard format. And at the number 7 spot, you'll see one of the cards that makes Nezhat so strong. It's actually Tirion Fordring, the Paladin minion. In many ways, I think this is the best card in Hearthstone. There's just so much raw value packed into this guy. He's got a big body. He's got Divine Shield. He's a taunt minion. Even after he dies, he gives you an insanely good 5/3 weapon to play, which is almost worth 8 mana all by itself. So this is the big bomb that you drop in any Paladin deck that instantly can win you a game if your opponent doesn't have an answer. The only thing that has really ever held Tirion Fordring back is the fact that Paladin hasn't always been the strongest class, but as long as Paladin has some way to play Tirion in its list, Tirion is going to be a very, very good card that, regardless of what else exists in your deck or in your collection, this guy is good enough to win you games practically all on his own. So that right there, he just gives you that ultimate go-to card to always drop into a deck and always find success. Moving on to the number 6 spot is another class card, much like Tirion, that can just define a deck and define your collection. This time around, it's Lord Jaraxxus, the Warlock minion. This guy is his own win condition bottled up into a single card. If you're able to play Lord Jaraxxus safely and start pumping out insane amounts of value off of his hero power, which summons a 6/6 minion for 2 mana, and his 8 durability weapon that just continually hits for 3 damage over and over again, Lord Jaraxxus is going to win you the game. So this has been a core piece of virtually every Warlock deck that has ever been in control archetype. So things like Handlock and Reno Lock rely on Lord Jaraxxus. He has not been a staple in Zoo, which has been a very prominent Warlock deck in Hearthstone. But if you're looking to add some sort of big bomb, big threat to your collection, and you love to play Warlock, you absolutely cannot go wrong with Lord Jaraxxus. So now it's time for the top 5, starting off with a 5-mana minion. This time it's Leroy Jenkins. The reason this guy is so good to craft is simply because he is a win condition in so many different decks. He is the highest damage playable charging minion in the game. So you get 6 instant damage for 5 mana, which is fairly good on its own. Sometimes you just need 6 damage to win. But he also combos so well with other effects like Power Overwhelming in Warlock or Cold Blood in Rogue that you've seen him be a stereotypical finisher in those 2 classes. But that doesn't mean he only fits in Warlock and Rogue. He can be played in a lot of different decks. Face style hunters and warriors have also utilized Leroy. But essentially, since he is the go-to charge minion from the classic set, anytime you're looking for burst damage, there's a good chance Leroy Jenkins is going to answer that call, making him an important piece of any collection. Moving on to the number 4 spot, it's Blood Mage Thanos. Now you might be asking yourself, how can a 1/1 minion be worth crafting? That's such a weak card. And the reason is simply because Blood Mage Thanos fits into so many different decks. And even though he's only 2 mana, even though he's only a 1/1, you'll be surprised at just how clutch this card can be. Sometimes you just absolutely have to have that spell damage that's this cheap. And you don't want to run Kobold Geomancer because it's not a great card. Blood Mage Thanos also gives you some card draw with his Death Rattle effect and synergizes with Death Rattle style cards. So this is a lot of stuff bundled into a single card, which is probably a theme you've detected in this list. The more things a card does, of course, the stronger and the better it's going to be. So Blood Mage Thanos fits into things like Shaman perfectly, setting up those Spirit Claws or those Maelstrom Portals, but that's not it. He fits in Druid because he makes Swipe so much stronger. He fits in so many different decks just because spell damage is so valuable, and he's so cheap that you can do a lot of spells in a single turn in combination with Blood Mage Thanos. So this is sort of a little jack-of-all-trades card, or at least a jack-of-all-decks card that will give you a surprising amount of value, and he's always a card that you can just consider adding into a list, and he's probably more often than not going to fit. So now it's time for the top 3, and this card might actually surprise some people since it's sort of a class card. It's not a part of the classic set, so it will eventually rotate out of standard format. But I'd like to argue that Jaraxxus is just so strong and so archetype defining, and that he will become the new centerpiece for Reno style decks, that you can't go wrong crafting him. If you haven't played with Jaraxxus before, I think you'll be surprised just how strong his effect is. The ability to create a custom spell on demand that meets your needs in a specific setting gives you a lot of control as a player, not to mention, of course, that the power that these potions pack per mana cost is extremely high. So it's in many ways a high tempo play that gives you a swing turn in a single card, which is incredibly powerful. Plus, with things like Brand Bronzebeard, Jaraxxus gets even stronger because you can create 2 custom potions, and I suspect we'll see other synergy cards tossed out with Jaraxxus as well, and future cards that support the Reno style. There can only be one, no duplicate kind of deck, making Jaraxxus even stronger for those Priest, Warlock, and Mage players that are able to run Reno style decks with this card. So if you ever like those spellcaster classes and you like the Reno style of play, then you can't go wrong crafting Jaraxxus. Taking the number 2 spot is Sylvanas Windrunner. This is another card that just can do so much and fits in so many different decks that it's inevitable that you'll end up either crafting or playing this card someday in the course of your Hearthstone career. She's a 6 mana 5/5, which is a solid body. Her Death Rattle, of course, is very a high friction kind of play that can frustrate your opponent, that can deny them options, that can make them make suboptimal plays. So sometimes you don't even really see the value that Sylvanas offers because it's happening behind the veil of your opponent's plays, but you'll just have to trust me. On average, she's incredibly strong. Sometimes she helps you steal your opponent's Ragnaros. Sometimes she helps you steal your opponent's Tirion Fordring, right? Other times she's just causing them problems behind the scenes. So whether it's turn 6 on an empty board, whether they have a huge board, it's often just a strong play to play Sylvanas Windrunner. Not to mention, of course, her synergy as a Death Rattle card with a lot of other cards that synergize off Death Rattles makes her even better. So Sylvanas Windrunner, I've often called one of the best or most craftable legendaries in Hearthstone. But I'm actually giving the top spot to a different card this time around. I think the best card to craft right now is Ragnaros the Firelord. Now, I can't say that this card is played in every deck or a ton of decks. It's not a card that you can build a deck around either. It's just the kind of card that no matter what turn it is, no matter what the situation is, it often feels like a pretty decent play. So unless you're just dead on the board to your opponent, there's a good chance Ragnaros the Firelord is going to give you some value. He's incredibly difficult for opponents to deal with. He's an instant effect in that as soon as you play him, you hit that end turn button, you know he's going to hit somebody for 8. Sometimes he'll snipe your opponent for 8 damage to the face. Sometimes he'll clear a really valuable minion. There's just a lot that this card can do. And if he's left unchecked, of course, Ragnaros over the course of 2, 3, 4 turns will ultimately win you a game just because the value he offers is way too high. Not to mention that when it really comes down to it, I think Ragnaros the Firelord is one of the most iconic or defining or fun and enjoyable cards in the entire game. As a new player, as someone looking to diversify your collection, help it grow, this is the kind of card that's just so much fun to see in action. He really symbolizes the RNG of Hearthstone. It's that 50-50 to win the game or lose the game right there bundled into a single card. And as frustrating as that is, sometimes as a player with a growing collection without a ton of cards, those kinds of situations and that style of play can really help you win games. Playing to your outs, playing for that 1 in 8 Ragnaros snipe to the enemy hero's face. Sometimes that's how you win games, and sometimes that's how you have fun in Hearthstone. So you can't really go wrong with Ragnaros the Firelord as a card, and since he offers so much more as an experience, this is my top card. That's right, I think Ragnaros the Firelord is the best legendary card to craft in Hearthstone. And that's going to wrap it up for my list. Now, clearly a lot of people out there are going to disagree with my choices. I'm sure you think I left some cards out. I'm sure you think I got the order all wrong. Well, I'd love to hear those thoughts. Share them in the comments below. What's your top card? What did I get right? What did I get wrong? Did I forget Malygos? Yeah, he's an awesome card. He was probably number 11 on my list. There are a lot more cards that are very good that deserved mentioning, so share your thoughts, share your take. I certainly want to read it all. But thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.